Today's episode is brought to you by the Create, Engage Marketing Accelerator, our brand new program to help startup consulting founders like you scale your business through digital marketing. This is something that I am really passionate about and so excited that we are able to launch. I regularly get messages from listeners like you and others in my network asking for marketing advice. Everything from what were the steps that I took to launch Create Engage, through to what's the best platform for running a webinar, through to how do you create great content for LinkedIn, and everything in between. At Create Engage, this is exactly what we help our clients do, and more. But for many startup consulting firms, our retained support is simply not a cost-effective option. I've been in your shoes and I know how it feels. You want to use digital marketing, you know it works, and you see the results it delivers for others, but you don't know where to start. At this stage in your journey, you have more time than you do money, but you want to make sure that you are investing that time in the right way to deliver return on investment for your business. We are launching our marketing accelerator to do exactly that, to give you the strategic advice, the guidance, the support you need at a price that makes it a no-brainer for smaller consulting firms like yours. By joining our accelerator, you will join a network of like-minded consulting entrepreneurs, all focused on growing their businesses. Each cohort will be handpicked to ensure that there is no competitive tensions in the group, giving you the comfort to discuss your challenges openly and learn from your peers. Each month, you will meet with one of our expert team and your fellow accelerator members for our Accelerator Roundtable, where we will walk through your specific marketing challenges and develop the plan to help you successfully deliver your marketing goals. We'll do this in small, focused groups, letting you get our advice, but also learn from your fellow members and benefiting from hearing the advice we're giving to them to apply to your own business. This isn't the end of the accelerator, though. Each month, we'll hold a private webinar just for Accelerator members, where we will walk you through everything you need to know and through your top questions, the things that you have asked us to show you. This could be from how to run a great webinar through to how to launch your own industry-leading podcast. We'll also give you our tried and tested systems and templates, everything you need to make your marketing successful. There's a lot in there, but if that wasn't enough, we'll also be bringing every member together into our private LinkedIn community, giving you a place to share your ideas, ask for advice, and learn from each other to help make your marketing better. As this is the first accelerator program we're running, we're launching January 2021, we are offering all of this for just £750 per month, plus VAT, with an initial commitment of 6 months. Less than £5,000 to give you everything you need to set your consulting firm up for success. Just imagine if that helps you secure one project, think about the return on investment and what that could mean for your business. Places are limited, and we have already seen a ton of early interest in this first accelerator cohort. So if you want to find out more and apply to be part of our Create Engage Marketing Accelerator, then visit createengage.co.uk/grow to read everything you need to know about the accelerator, fill out the application, and we look forward to welcoming you to our first cohort to help you accelerate your business through digital marketing. Hi, and welcome to Climbing Consulting. This is a very special episode for two reasons. Firstly, it marks the 70th episode of Climbing Consulting, a huge milestone, and one that I have to say a big thank you to you, my listeners, for. Without you, this show wouldn't have even got off the ground. And secondly, this week, I bring you a slightly different type of episode. Instead of my usual interview format, this episode is a panel discussion all about how you can start your career in consulting. I'm a huge believer in broadening the reach of our industry and helping those who may not know about consulting or may have misconceptions about what it is and what it isn't. So when I was asked by my friend Deri Hughes to chair this panel on behalf of Explore Consulting, I was so excited. I knew this was going to be an amazing opportunity to bring you advice from some brilliant consultants and ex-consultants who are doing great things, know all about our industry, and could provide an honest and in-depth insight into the world of consulting. For this session, I was joined by a fantastic panel who brought such refreshing and honest perspectives to the discussion. In this episode, you will hear from Tamsin Chislett, co-founder and CEO of OnLoan, Harriet Foster, social impact investment manager at Impetus, Darren Ashby, partner at Business 4.0, and Julianne Elebode Akesanya, general manager at ENT UK. In this conversation, our panelists dig into what it's really like to work in consulting, the benefits that it's given them, and some of the challenges that you need to consider too. They also answer a range of questions from people like you, giving their take on the topics that graduates and those looking to make their first move into consulting really want to know about. I had a great time chairing this session, and I'm really pleased to be able to share it as part of this podcast. If you are at university right now and you're considering your career options once you graduate, or you're early on in your career and considering a move into consulting, I know you will find this episode extremely valuable. So with all of that said, sit back, relax, and enjoy episode 70 of Climbing Consulting. Well, firstly, thank you to everyone who's giving their time for this discussion. And knowing the panel we've got here, you're going to get tons from this already just in the preparation for this. I know there's so much that this panel are going to share with you, and we're going to spend the next hour or so exploring that. Just to Deri's point, we'll spend about 50 or about half an hour going through who we are and talking about how consulting's helped all of the panelists in the careers that they've achieved so far and the skills they've learned. And then we're going to leave a whole chunk of time for Q&A. Harriet, do you want to start?
Hi, everyone. So I'm Harriet. I'm an ex-Bain consultant. Bain was actually my first sort of proper job, if you like, after uni. But I had tried being a violin teacher before that, and I did have a stint teaching English in China. So a bit of a mixed bag. As you might be wondering, I wasn't really sure what I wanted to do for a job. But I think the joy in not knowing is being curious and trying to find out what you want to do. Before Bain, I studied natural sciences at Durham, so nothing to do with music or English or business, but had a good time. After Bain, I joined an organisation called Impetus, and Impetus are a social investor that invest funds and build charities that are working with young people from disadvantaged backgrounds to get them better grades at school and or get them into a job and keep that job. And incredibly pertinent right now because, we're in the middle of a recession. Getting jobs is going to be difficult, and also there's been a lot of disruption at school. So really, really important stuff. I also qualified as a coach a year into working at Impetus, and about a year ago set up my own coaching and training business and work with an ex-Bain colleague with the training stuff, and also do a bit of live events production because I love music so much, and did a week's work experience at Radio 3 last year. So I've done quite a few things. I'm very happy to talk about those if anyone thinks they might be relevant, or happy to just stick to the Bain thing. But that's my intro.
Brilliant, Harriet. Thank you very much. Darren, should we come to you next?
Sure. Hi, everybody. So my name's Darren Ashby. I'm a partner at Business 4.0. I actually left school and I went to art school and thought I was going to be an artist. But actually, I think the thing that sort of underlined my studies was actually a real interest in change and how people and organizations and even countries sort of change. And I didn't want to do that in theory all my life. So I got into business because I was really interested in the role business plays in the world. And I started off in a small startup, actually a toy company, a little independent toy company. And then as I sort of grew up, I went to chocolate and joined Cadbury and ended up as a director in group strategy in chocolate. And then from chocolate, actually, I then became a consultant. So I started off at Ernst & Young. And then I joined a very creative innovation consultancy called What If. And that really changed my life, actually. What was quite an interesting place. And it really made me realize how different a culture could feel and how different it could be in how you show up at work every day. And then after What If, myself and 3 others set up Business 4.0. And we spend our time helping businesses change faster, big businesses. So I spend a lot of my time with exec teams and leadership teams of FTSE 50, FTSE 100 businesses, just getting them to think differently about the role they play in the world and actually how they get all their people behind them to actually make change real. So yeah, that's me.
Brilliant, Darren. Thanks a lot. Tamsin?
Hi, if everyone can hear me. So my name's Tamsin. I left university thinking I would go and work in international development. So I spent lots of time abroad in Nepal and Tanzania and essentially realized I didn't have very many useful skills to be helpful. And so took some good advice and applied for consulting roles and ended up spending 2 and a bit years at Bain. Deri was one of my first bosses. And then after Bain, I ended up in Uganda for a couple of years. So I worked for a cotton factory out there. I came back and worked for a tech startup because it felt like everybody was working for tech startups. And then just under 2 years ago, I started my own. So I now run a fashion rental business.
Julianne, hopefully you can hear me. And why don't you pick up just while we wait for Tamsin to come back online?
My name's Julianne. I'm currently the general manager at E&T UK, but previously was a consultant at PwC and then moved on to General Electric, so GE Healthcare Partners. But yeah, so I'm currently general manager at E&T UK.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Julianne. And so, yes, we will persevere, Darren, through the technical difficulties, and let's dive into it, because I think those intros have given our audience a really good background on yourselves, and I think some great context around, I think the key thing is no one here was destined to be a management consultant from the age of 5. And so it's a great chance to actually dig into a bit more about why you went into the career you've had, and I think also how consulting's helped you. So to kick us off, and Harriet, you mentioned you've done a whole host of things. So maybe we'll come to you first. Is one of the biggest benefits of consulting, as we all know, is the skills you gain. And I'd love to hear, thinking about where you are now and the various sort of things you're doing now but have done over your career so far. What is it from your time in consulting that's helped you get to where you are today? And I mean, if you can pin it down, what are those top 2, 3, 4 skills that have really helped you accelerate to get the career you have now?
Yeah, I've been reflecting on this. I think one thing that working as a consultant has really taught me, because of the fast pace and because there's an expectation that you're learning quickly, there's a sort of overarching idea that it's really important to build trust with the people that you're working with. And I think when you're in a consulting environment, it teaches you the ways in which to do that well and quickly. Because when you build trust in teams, wherever you're working, you have a much better working relationship and you're just generally much more productive. And I think, a lot of the trust is based on your competence. And I think the skills that helped me from consulting whilst I was there, but also my current job, I guess the first thing that comes to mind is this idea of creating a story or a narrative around what you're telling somebody. So a lot of consulting is about kind of communicating an idea or a recommendation or influencing somebody in a discussion. And I think that's been really invaluable for my role now, because when I'm thinking about strategic questions for my work or that kind of thing, I'm thinking about how to structure a message and I'm thinking about the audience in which I'm going to present that message to. So I think that's been really, really helpful for me, structuring my thoughts into something coherent and also interesting. People really like stories and stories get you far. So I'd say that's one thing. And then I guess maybe off the back of that, when you're thinking about who you're, telling a story to, you want to think about who it is and what level of detail they want to engage with. And I think that was a really big learning for me in consulting, because I can be quite detail focused and I want to sort of share all the detail that I know because I think it's interesting. But actually, it's about knowing what that person needs to know, who you're speaking to or the group that you're speaking to. And I think, it's sort of knowing how to navigate between different levels of detail in a discussion and also in your work. So I hope that makes sense, because I think that the detail point is important, because when you're doing your own work, especially if, my first job was at Bain. So a lot of my work was detail focused and it helped me to understand it. It made me think about how to cover the details well and have the right processes in place to cover that so that people trusted me and again, trusted my competence. So whether you like it or not, it teaches you to be detail orientated. And I think that's a really good thing. So I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, certainly does, Harriet. And I think some really interesting areas in there for us to explore. Darren, having listened to that, how similar or different are the sort of key skills that you lean on? Would you say they're those, or are there some others that you think actually really help you in what you do now?
Yeah, do you know what? I was trying to tease apart what I learned from, being in business generally and some of the specifics that sort of that consulting teach you. And I mean, consulting's a pretty varied field, right? So lots of things are dialed up in different levels depending on where you sort of fit in. I think a lot of what Harriet was saying really resonated about how you bring people with you, right, is just critical, and storytelling and synthesis of complex amounts of data, that all makes a lot of sense. I actually wrote down 4 words that I think really sort of have kind of been specific about being a consultant rather than sort of just my other kind of business experience. So one is point of view. I think you don't go very far in consulting if you don't actually have a point of view on what needs to happen. And it's that mix of commercial point of view and a bit of creativity and a bit of humanity in that, right? So that you can bring others with you. I think the second is process. Consulting gives you good process because you have to, under quite time constricted deadlines and in different working environments, have to bring a new team with you to deliver results, fast, right? And so if you don't have good process, then it turns quickly into chaos. And the client sees that pretty quickly, The third is bravery. There's just something about being in front of new people, and not just sort of any old people, often quite senior business people, often, can be quite cynical about consultants, and you develop a sort of a bravery about getting out there, making stuff happen. Even quite a junior level, you get quite a lot of exposure as a consultant, and it forces you to sort of confront a bit that. One of the things that I often talk about is I used to be terrified of public speaking, like literally terrified. I actually took time off work when I first started my career because of public speaking, and now I literally help execs sort of stand up and teach them how to do it, and I'm constantly having to do it, and actually consultants really helped me there develop sort of some skills. And so it's if you're sort of going to go in Christ, that bravery point, you don't have to be brave from day one or be able to put yourself out there completely. You kind of can get there through your kind of career, but it definitely has helped me with that. And then the final thing, actually, I think I mentioned it in process, is just pace. And I don't just mean running around busy. I mean, again, the pace of consulting can be quite intense, right? And you either love that or you hate it, but again, what it teaches you is prioritization. You have to quickly cut to the chase and focus on the things that are going to make a difference. That's what it's given me.
Some really good ones in there. And I think, like you said, different slants on some of the things Harriet said, and implicit to both of the points you've made, there's that repetition piece, to what you said, I guess, about your public speaking, Darren. You got better by doing it often, and consulting gives you that chance you're in with new people every project, every 6-12 weeks. Suddenly there's a new team you've got to speak in front of, a new team you've got to build trust with, as Harriet said. Julianne, I'd be interested in your perspective, having sort of heard some of those points that Darren said, and I think you caught some that Harriet said, but we can sort of paraphrase. What are some of those skills that you've found most powerful and helped your career most? Is it sort of building on what Darren said? Is there anything else that's really helped you and sort of you looking back think, that's what I really value for my time in consulting?
Well, I think I caught a little bit of what Harriet said, but I absolutely love what Darren just mentioned about bravery. I'd never thought about a job teaching me to be brave before. You often think I need to be brave to be employed, but actually I think that hits the nail on the head. And I'd probably like to build on that and say there's the elements of bravery, but actually consulting teaches you to often trust yourselves. So I remember when I first started consulting, one of my first consulting managers always spoke about applying a fresh pair of eyes. And he would say, what do you notice that's weird about this? Or what do you think is different? And he would always encourage me to share my opinion. And I think initially I was quite shy about, that's quite obvious. I'm sure everybody else has picked up on that. But I think what I quickly learned in consulting is that what we bring, the value that we often bring as consultants, is that ability to apply a fresh perspective on things. And the more senior you get, the more often or the more likely you are to learn to often trust your gut's instincts and trust your ability to be critical. So I think that moves on to my next skill that I think I've probably built up through consulting and applied through the rest of my career. And it's my ability to apply a critical eye. And I use the word critical not necessarily from a negative perspective, but just being able to look at things and dive deeper into things and try to unpick the why and the connections between different elements or different relationships or stakeholders, whatever the case may be. So yeah, I love that word bravery. I'll build onto that, the ability to cast a critical eye and trusting your critical eye. I think adaptability as well is something that I've noticed ex-consultants are able to do more so than people that have been in industry or in a specific role for a long period of time. Because with consulting, you can often be thrown into a project and you have to very much quickly become an expert in that project in a short period of time. And so when you have to do that across a short period of time, you learn to be adaptive, even just being in a different location. So I've worked on projects doesn't sound really exotic on a day like this, but that spans the entirety of like Cheshire and Merseyside. And so having to run across different parts of the UK in a single day means you have to be physically adaptive. But I think being mentally adaptive is a key skill that consultants will bring into any situation. Those are definitely skills I've built up and taken into the different roles.
Some key points in there. I just want to welcome Tamsin back. Hi, Tamsin. Have we got you? Can you hear us?
I can hear you great, and so sorry for the internet problems.
Fantastic. Well, just why don't, as you've joined us, perfect timing. We're talking about the skills that all of you have gained from consulting that's really helped you in your careers. I think we touched on some really powerful ones. So Harriet's point around story and narrative, Darren's points around bravery. And I think, Julianne, that last point, those pieces around casting a critical eye and that adaptability. I think that adaptability point, I'd love to explore more a little shortly, actually, because I think that's a really big benefit that you get from consulting that those who maybe haven't been in the career don't. Tamsin, I'd just be really fascinated if there's anything that you'd sort of add on to that, any builds, anything that has really helped you in your career.
Yeah, sure. So I agree with all of those, but I'd say one to add that may feel obvious but can get missed is the financial skills and being able to knock up a business plan or a financial model really quickly, and also to do one that is genuinely useful and to understand how to put different assumptions together to get to a different understanding of how the finances work in an organization. And that's really specifically helped me in a couple of different places I've worked to raise money. So I've worked for organizations where I've raised grant funding, where I've raised debt, where I've raised equity, and each time being able to give the people I'm talking to about money confidence that I know how to forecast finances and understand them, the ins and outs of them, has been really helpful. So that's definitely another one. And then I think I'd just reiterate, I think Darren mentioned pace, and I think for me, one of my biggest takeaways that will stick with me forever from consulting is just managing to get through loads of stuff really fast. And just, when you're on. And that was definitely a very different experience from university, which is like the opposite of that. Just sort of, spend sort of a few weeks reading some books and gradually put together an essay. And then you come in and you're meant to have a perspective and an intelligent point of view on something within 3 hours. And you need to work out how you're best going to spend those 3 hours and then get on it really fast. And, working as I do, building a startup now, pace is really everything. And so that's been really valuable.
No, I think that pace point's key. And I want to come on to that. It's an extension to that, Tamsin, and picks up on what Julianne said. I think for all of you now, you're running different businesses. You've worked with different colleagues, both those who have worked in consulting and those who haven't. And obviously, part of this conversation is not just where you take consulting, but what you do afterwards. And for those thinking about starting in consulting, what is it you've seen? So to that point around some of colleagues who haven't come from consulting aren't as adaptable. Are there any skills that you think, when you compare either colleagues or people you've worked with from consulting versus those who haven't, are there any additional things that you just see those in industry don't necessarily get exposure to or experience of? And if it's just everything you've said, we'll move on. But I'm fascinated if there's any others that sort of really stand out to you.
I think consultants are great at packaging. And if there's any Nigerians on this event, that packaging means something else in a slang kind of way, but actually where we put things together, like we're fantastic at putting together a slide deck. And I think we take that for granted. The ability to put information together and present it in a concise and interesting manner is such a fantastic skill that I think consultants bring that you often don't find. So I remember when I started in my current role, I had an expectation about what was going to be presented to the board. And one of my members of the staff gave me a slide deck that, if I was really honest, I was just shocked. And I was like, oh, this is a 100-page slide deck, and you could have really just put this down into 10 pages. And the board had been used to receiving this. So I just quickly did the consulting magic on it, put together a few PowerPoint slides. And the response I got, I found it quite shocking, because I took it for granted that it was just a simple slide deck. But actually, the ability to present information and communicate things in an, I don't want to say attractive, but in a manner which is articulate enough. I don't know if that's the right word, but the packaging of our work is something that if you've not done consulting, I think it's quite, I don't know many other ways which people develop that in a really quick way.
Firstly, building on Julianne's point, I think the underlying point is absolutely right. You know, how to synthesize complex information and package it up. I actually love to tell this story because, as a consultant, you'll know how rare this is. We did a massive strategy project with a big insurance firm without one PowerPoint, which I'm very proud of. So we did what you were saying, but used very different. We used exhibitions and all sorts of things, bizarrely. But the underlying point, I totally buy Julianne for sure. Nick, I was just to kind of return back to your question. I was actually going to turn it on its head a little bit, and also just sort of talk about, like, you know, I think it is. I think that change from industry into consulting can be quite tricky, right? Because the whole business model, the pace, you know, all of those things are really, really tough. And I think one of the things that makes it work is just actually quite often coming out of industry, take a dip, right? Be prepared to just take a little dip. The salaries are normally pretty good in consulting, right? You know, go for parity, which might mean you take a little responsibility dip. It gives you the space to learn the business model, the pace, the process of it, without quite the level of expectations that you might have. And honestly, everyone I've seen who does that moves up much, much quicker. And the reason I think they then move up quicker is because when you come from industry, you're already advantaged with a huge amount of empathy for your clients, you know, from really understanding what it's like to be inside, you know, some of these businesses, you know, and what it's like to be a client. And that is incredibly important. I'm not saying it's the only way. Like, there are some great consultants out there who develop that through their projects over the years, but it is a massive advantage. So I think just give yourself some space to learn, because they are different, you know, and if you try and go in right at the top straight away, it can be pretty tough.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, Darren, particularly for those on the session who are coming from industry, looking at this as sort of their second careers. Actually, I did exactly that. I went from a graduate job in industry into consulting, and I remember the first 2 weeks. Yeah, it was a rather sharp adjustment. If this isn't too much of a jump, I think there's a really interesting point in there. I'd love to get all of your perspectives actually to that point around what consulting isn't for those either at university looking to enter the industry or those who are in their first job looking to make a move. Are there any misconceptions or areas that you found unexpected or found sort of junior colleagues really struggled with? Take what you just said there, Darren, you know, the pace is one. Are there any other areas that you think anyone on this session thinking about the industry, just either myths you want to debunk or things they should really think about before deciding, yeah, that's going to be where I take my career next? Harriet, you look like you've got a thought. Do you want to start?
I've got a thought, but I don't know if it answers your question, because I wandered into consulting. I didn't really know what it entailed until I kind of got in there and worked it out. So I don't think I was under any misconception. I just didn't know what I was doing. But I would say that if you're going into it, go in with your eyes open, because there's some great stuff that you can pick up, what we've just talked about, all those skills that honestly are going to get you so far ahead if you can pick those up. And whether you go in straight after uni or if you don't, you do something first in industry and then you join, but you're going to pick those up. But I think it's knowing what those are and whether they're the things that you want and value, and then knowing, you know, what life is going to be like as a consultant in order to do that. And, you know, how much of do you want to be there for 3 years and pick that up and then go, or do you want to be there longer? And I think it's just about knowing what it entails. And I hope that's helpful, because I think I was a little bit of a sort of dreamer and sort of did all sorts of stuff. And then I was like, oh yeah, consulting would be interesting. And it really was, but I didn't really know until I was there. So
Yeah, I think it's a great point, Harriet. Sorry, go on. I didn't see you. That was Julianne. I think that was you. Please go on.
I was just going to say, I think a misconception that I had when I started in consulting was that I had to have all the answers. And that really scared me. I remember on my first consulting project, so I work mainly in healthcare. So I went to work in a commissioning unit and was asked to work directly with the director of an analytics team. I didn't know anything about analytics. And he was obviously a director. And in the back of my mind, I kept on saying to myself, I'm the consultant. I'm meant to tell him how to do things. So I should surely have all the answers. Obviously, I still wouldn't have the answers now because I'm not an analytics expert. So I think that's a misconception that you have to somehow be cleverer or be the expert. But no, you're meant to go there, listen and help your clients solve their problems, not tell them what to do necessarily. So yeah.
Yeah, it's a bit like Darren's point, isn't it? On the sort of point of view, it's a sort of humble point of view of know what you know and know what you don't know and ask good questions. I think that's really important.
I think can build on that and maybe a counterpoint to Darren's as well is that I think my biggest misconception about consulting before I joined was that you had to know anything about business at all. And so I did philosophy at university. My parents were teachers. They basically only had friends who were teachers. I pretty much didn't know anyone who worked in a business. Like that just wasn't the world that I came from at all. And I had lots of friends at uni applying to consulting firms and me sort of thinking, I don't really know what that is. And, it's not relevant to me. And I applied in the year after university after I'd done a lot more looking into it. And in my start group at Bain, we had people who had studied, music, philosophy, English literature, all sorts of broad topics. And it sounds like this group is just as diverse in terms of where they came from before consulting. And you get taught a lot and you get expected to learn an awful lot and you build your business knowledge up from there. And so for me, that was a big eye-opener that took me a whole year after university to realise.
Yeah, Tams, I think that's a key point. I think actually 3 of us all did the same degree at different universities. None of us did business. So, speak for the 3 I know who did the same degree as me. So I think that's really key is anyone listening to this, you don't have to have done a business or a management degree to become a good consultant. And actually some of those other skills, to your point, that you learn in different subjects really help you think differently, not just apply the business model you learnt. One misconception that I think I personally had, I know when I joined, and Harriet, I think you touched on, so I'd be interested in everyone's opinion on this, is I think there is a perception in consulting, you sort of got to go in to make partner or nothing. It's kind of like if you're not in it for the next 12 years to get to the top, actually, some people think, is it worth doing? And obviously, I think we're all testaments to the fact you don't have to spend all of your career, or Darren, you've gone off and started your own firm out the back of the firm you were with, so you don't have to stay with one firm for 12 years. What advice would you all give people on that in terms of how to think about their time in consulting and actually deciding how much of their career that should be?
I guess careers need to be sort of, human shaped these days, right? There is no one path. It's very much up to you. I think consulting is a really useful part of your journey though, right? Because it gives you such a different kind of experience, So for me, I mean, this was not deliberate, right? I wish I'd been smart enough to sort of cast this kind of career path out, but I look back and I've had experience in startups, big FTSE businesses, inside them. And then I went to consulting, and because it gave me that kind of breadth. So now I think I've worked with every single kind of type and shape and size and sector of business. And it's that variety that consulting can give you is just incredibly useful. Whatever stage you decide to go into it at. Not everyone is rigged to become a director or a partner in a consulting business, right? And it's a very specific kind of thing that you need to get good at, right, in order to do that. And it doesn't mean you're not a good consultant. Actually, some of the best consultants I know weren't rigged to then become directors and partners, and then went on to become CFOs, CEOs, marketing officers, whatever, really, after their stint in consulting. And so, partner is definitely not the only destination. In fact, I have worked in firms where I looked up and I went, I definitely don't want to be you, is the truth of it. And the other thing, I was actually just on your previous point, Nick, the other danger is we paint a very rosy picture of the consulting industry, right? It's not all rosy. It's why events like this are really important. There are firms where they will burn you out. Is the truth of it. Be selective, right? You've really got to get to know the people you're going to be working with and the other people around you. I mean, I don't think there are many consulting firms that aren't intense to work in, but there are those firms that help you recover from that intensity, create the emotional support around you to grow from it. And there are those that will let you, not deliberately, they're not going, we want to burn you out. They're just not equipped to actually provide the support that you need, frankly. And so just be cautious about it. But yeah, if you go into it with your eye on partners, the ultimate goal, I think that's going to be it could be quite a miserable experience, actually. I've seen people like that, and it just, you become competitive and single-minded. Go in to become a brilliant consultant, and then if you've got the aptitude to sort of do the sales and the relationship development and all the rest of it after that, then great, you'll find yourself there. If not, go and be a brilliant leader in a different kind of business.
Yeah, I'd say, Darren, your point on sort of what the partner does in terms of client development and business development and selling and pitching, and that's sort of generally what they do. But I guess, depending on how long you stay at a firm, you develop different skill sets as you go on. So I guess like the first, especially if you join at sort of like the associate level, the kind of first level in the firm, you'd be learning all the kind of the analytics, all the kind of PowerPoint stuff. I mean, you do that throughout anyway, but you're kind of really focused on the detail and you own the detail, and that's your job. And as you progress, you kind of own more client relationships and you manage teams. And so I guess it depends on what you want to learn and how long you're willing to stay to learn those things. You can learn those things outside of the consulting firms as well, but I guess there are different phases depending on how long you stay. And also, if you head in after you've been in industry for a while, that I've seen consultants come in and sort of go in at the level where they're maybe not covering as much detail, not doing as much analytics, and they're kind of getting more into client relationships. So I guess it depends on that as well, like what kind of skills you want to pick up and when.
I really like Harriet's point. I think it's learning what you're going into. And so there are so many different career paths within consulting. So being a sales expert, actually being a technical expert. And I think it's important to also just be quite self-aware about what are your strengths, and don't try and play to something that is your strength. I'm very much a believer in, I focus more on my strengths than my weaknesses. And so if you find that actually you enjoy the technical elements of your work more so than trying to sell work, then you should focus on that. I think we're of the generation where we're not a job for life kind of generation. We move around, and actually that's really beneficial as a consultant, because your ability to build a variety of skills and build a network of clients. If you want to be a partner, it's all about the sales to a large extent. And how do you get sales? Ability to find clients. And so actually, if you're able to step out of consulting, increase your network and come back in with a different perspective, that's quite attractive to a lot of people at senior level. So I think I didn't go into consulting as my first job. I actually went into consulting after 2 previous roles, which looking back, that really helped me in my consulting career. And I've left now, and I'm actually currently thinking, what would my next role look like? Would I go back into consulting following my current experience? And I think it's flexible. You should just play it as you see, but definitely be self-aware and identify what you want your path to look like, as opposed to just rudimentary climbing that corporate ladder. Because what you quickly realize is within the partner level are levels. So I remember when I joined PwC, and I might be making this number up, but there are like 20 something different levels within the partnership. And so you're like the pyramid, the ladder never ends. So if you're only trying to become partner just so you can be at the top of the apex of the corporate world, that's a miserable life, in my opinion. So I think it's more about identifying what skill sets you want to build and how you can utilize what skills you already have.
I think some great advice there, all. And I think actually a really nice segue to the Q&A section, because we've been getting a ton of questions as we've been going on all of the topics we've covered. And so I think, why don't we dive into those? For everyone who is watching us, we are receiving all of your questions. We are going to try our best to answer as many of them as possible. I think we have more questions than we have time, so we'll try our best. If they aren't answered, you can pick up with any of us afterwards or with Deri and the team, and they'll be able to help you. And I think, just to your last point there, Julian, about how you got into consulting, we've had a question from someone who's said they don't have a degree or a management qualification. They've just got years of experience. They want to get into consulting. Obviously, you do have a degree, but you made the point you've come into consulting sort of as a second or third stage in your career. I did the same. What advice would you give to sort of our audience member who's looking to break in that situation? What can they do to get themselves in the best position to get that consulting career they want?
I'll be really practical. So find somebody within the firm or firms that you want to work with. So I think the best way to enter most companies is actually having that personal relationships. Sometimes submitting an application, especially in the time that we're in on a careers website, where people are receiving tens of thousands of applications is probably not the most effective. So I think working with a recruiter, perfect. This is the perfect platform for that. And so I think working with a recruiter or actually finding individuals within that organization and maybe asking them if they can find time to speak with you. I personally will say that's the best route. I'm not a recruiter, a recruitment specialist, but I think submitting a blind application sometimes is not the most effective way to get into some of the big consulting firms. I got into consulting through an internship program off the back of another program, and through there was offered a full-time role. And so sometimes I think building some of those personal relationships with people already within the firm is probably the best way. That's probably controversial, but that's genuinely what I think.
No, it's a really good point. And for the rest of the panel, what is your take? Would you agree with Julianne? Is there sort of a different approach or another approach you'd suggest that this audience member takes? Tamsin, I'm conscious we haven't come to you for a little while. What's your take?
Yeah, sure. I mean, so look, I joined pretty much straight out of university, so different experience. And I do think that a lot of the consulting firms historically have been stuck in a sort of pattern matching behavior of recruitment. But I think Explore Consulting and others are really turning that on its head, which is great and providing a lot more opportunities to people. I think my advice would be, the same as everybody in terms of your preparation for interviews and for talking to people. So if you are somebody who's got a wealth of experience in industry, it's about working out how to translate that into consulting and how to use the skills that you've learned whilst also remaining really open and adaptable to new industries. So you want to come showing that you can pick up new industries quickly, that you can be really structured in your thinking, that you can be very logical, and that's what you've learned over your period, and that you do have specialist knowledge, but that specialist knowledge isn't stopping you from being open to like the constant process of learning that you do as a consultant. And I think if you can get that balance right, you're in for a good chance.
Yeah, some really good points in there. Darren, were you about to add? I'm conscious you, out of the panel, you are the one in consulting still. So how do you, if this person wants a role with you, and I know I'm opening a floodgate, what do you like to see from potential recruits? How would the best approach be?
So, well, look, I mean, I have a huge amount of time for experience. So that, like, looking for real life and business experience in different modes, I think is brilliant. We don't have a hard filter on academic qualifications. I think many businesses have begun to drop those. Again, I mean, look, it depends on what level you're coming into, and also how much of a recognition you have about what kind of a jump it actually is in your career. I've actually had some people who are like exec level, C-level people who have decided that they want to leave industry and move into consulting, come and talk to us. And you kind of often have the conversation, which is at your level to sustain your kind of salary, you're going to need to bring business with you, that you need to be a relationship and a business sort of engine, right? And that won't work, right? It just doesn't sort of translate across, right? When you, as I said earlier on, when you're sort of moving across from industry into consulting, just give yourself that little bit of space to learn it first. And then honestly, you'll sort of fly up. So I think it's not a hard filter. That description from Naomi is actually really positive. And we look for this holy grail, of commercial and creative and human. It's the overlap between those three things, and we're quite specific around what we mean around that. Commercial doesn't mean you have to be a finance whiz kid, right? It's sort of a practical commerciality around business that we're sort of looking for, right? Creativity is just the ability to sort of enter into creative conversations in the right way, just to let them sort of flow, to have ideas freely, and to, also create a bit of an environment around that. And then humanity, right? Do you have the mindset that actually it's people that deliver results? And do you show some insight into that? Those are the things that we're usually looking for. And then experience and all the rest of it kind of a little bit determines where you then come in.
I think that's some really key points. And just I've been reading the chat. I think the other side of this is get interested in the people you're applying for. I'm sure you see this as well. Well, all of you, you get a lot of applications for your respective businesses. You can be and want to be picky, and you want to find people who have a passion for what you do. I'll actually, because this is interactive, I'll put a message in the chat to show you our intern who we've just hired off the back of a phenomenal application and showed real interest in what we do. So for Naomi, who's submitted that question, for anyone else, it's a really key point. And I guess, Darren, to your point, you obviously touched on the sort of the upper end of industry. I guess there's also an element that actually for those who have lots of work experience, because consulting is a very well-paying career, you can actually come in very junior in consulting and still have a equal or sometimes better salary than what you had before. So I think your point around being humble is really key. Don't think because I'm a certain age I have to be a certain position. Be humble and it'll pay off. One of the other things we talked about, and I think, Darren, you spoke a lot on, and Harriet, you did as well, and it's a question we've had through, so this one's from Andrew, is considering the high pace environment, potentially high stress environment of consulting, and I think we've all been there, what advice would you give to anyone who's looking to enter this career or sort of in their early stages to help them protect their well-being, their mental health and not burn out? Harriet, do you want to start off here?
I've never had a baby, but I have heard about couples who, when they have a baby, they write down the top 3 things they love about their partner, and they stick it on the wall. So when they're having a really rough night, they can look at that piece of paper and be like, I love my partner because of these things. And I think maybe it's about thinking similarly with your job, because there are going to be nights when you think, God, these hours are very long. I don't think I want to do this anymore, based on this, this particular evening. But I think if you know what your kind of long-term goals are, and I say long-term, it could be, I want to be in consulting for 2 years, that's great, and I want to move on to something else, or it could be longer. But I think be clear on why you're there and have that in mind, and think about, maybe every 3 months rather than every evening or every late night, consider, am I making progress against these things? Is this still working for me? Because it has to work for you. Don't go into consulting because you can't think of anything else to do and, it could be a good idea. Like, be there because it makes sense for you. And that might be, Julianne was talking about skills. Think about the skills that you want to pick up. Are you picking those up still? And reflect on that, but also know that, you will have those, the fast pace, the kind of late nights, but it's up to you to work out whether it's worth it or not, I think.
So I had really good advice when I first joined Bain from a very senior partner, and it was advice that meant nothing to me at the time and only makes sense to me looking back on that period. And this is probably quite specific to joining as a graduate, when you're just starting out in your career in general. But his advice was like, your work is not your life. And there is sort of because of the long hours and because of the nature of jumping into a project and all piling on it really fast, and you've got, short deadlines and a clear end goal, there is a nature about consulting that makes it a bit cult-like at times. And certain firms amp this up more than others because it kind of helps the business in many ways. And certainly when I joined, I made some really brilliant friends. I ended up meeting the guy who I've now been dating for 10 years. I was working sort of however many hours a week. My social life was with people from work. And it was very all-encompassing. And I know now what the partner was trying to say to me is like, have your cutoff points. Go do something else. Get a hobby would have been a great idea. Do something that is completely separate and turns your mind away from work. And I honestly didn't really have that whilst I was working in consulting. And I think that made it quite tough at times. And now, I run a startup where it would be very, very easy to do the same thing. There is a never-ending to-do list of things to do, and we have to move really fast, and everything is critical. But I've really learned that actually stopping, closing your laptop, walking away, doing something completely different for your brain is so useful for the work that you're doing in the first place. So I wish I'd listened to that advice a lot earlier, to be honest.
One of the things I very quickly learned was I'm not saving a life. So whatever I'm doing can stop and come back to it tomorrow morning. And this was an important lesson for me to learn, because I remember I was working with one particular director who works all hours of the night. She's had phone calls with people at 1:30 in the morning. And this was how she operated. And this is an extreme. You don't have many people that works like this, but you can find who work in an extreme way. And when you join as a junior person, you're very keen to impress people. And I think what I had to reflect and learn is, who am I trying to impress and for what purpose? Because sometimes the things you're doing to try and impress people, they're not seeing and take it for granted, whereas you're literally burning your candles right to the wick. And so I think it's really, really important to just take a step back and think, I'm not on an operating table. I'm not a surgeon. I don't need to stay up 16 hours for work. Sleep is important for my brain and my ability to do my job properly. There's nothing wrong. You've not failed by going to your bed. But actually, more importantly, and I think what brought it home for me was, whilst we're at PwC, was actually a high profile incident where somebody committed suicide. Now, they didn't commit suicide because of work. They actually did it for personal reasons. But I was in the office building when it happened, and I came downstairs to find ambulances, and the whole entrance was shut off. And I think that for me was a turning point moment, that life is too short. there are really, really more important things. And I think this pandemic has probably taught a lot of us about the value of life and the importance to take a stop and actually just step back and look at the wider picture. So yeah, I think just reminding yourself that you're not saving a life. Unless you are, then it's really important.
We may think our PowerPoint does, Julianne, but rarely does it have that impact. Some great points in there. And I think that point is really key around just stepping back, particularly right now for anyone entering the industry. We're at home, all of your screens, everything's available. Actually take that step back and really build those boundaries. Want to change tack, and again, being led here by the questions from our audience. So we've had a question through from Raffaella about travel, and actually, does consulting provide the opportunities for that? Tamsin, I understand that maybe you take this, I understand actually you were able to go and work in Africa through your consulting role. So maybe you can answer does it, and then explain how it's benefited you through that.
Yeah, so I actually didn't work abroad whilst I was at Bain, but one of the perks of Bain that I took advantage of, literally the first day that I was allowed to, was a 6-month leave of absence. So I did 2 years of consulting and then took 6 months off unpaid. And I think my parents were in shock, like, what kind of job is this, which just allows you to disappear for 6 months and then come back to the job that you left? But the beauty of consulting is that a lot of them do that. You're on projects, so it's very easy to step away, do something else, come back to it. So I ended up in that period working in Zimbabwe, and I worked for a coffee mill. And as I mentioned earlier, I'd been working in international development, or attempting to, before I did consulting, and really just felt like I was useless. My philosophy degree wasn't helping anybody very much at that point. But in Zimbabwe, working for this coffee mill, I was actually able to contribute. So I was able to help the organization build better financial plans. I was able to help them assess what different businesses they might get into to sustain the business. It was wonderful because it was like this first moment where I felt like I actually could contribute some skills back to something that I was really interested in and cared about. So I came back to Bain I think I was meant to come back for 6 months. I think I made it to about 4 and then snuck out the door, and then ended up working in Uganda. And that was for a firm called Acumen that invests in businesses all over emerging markets. And they, part of what they do is really try to get people with strong business skills into some of the businesses that they're working in. So they do an awful lot to grow talent in the markets where they are, but they also encourage people to go and to work there as well. And I worked for this cotton mill in Uganda, and as I say, help them raise debt, help them grow new crops, help them with all kinds of stuff, none of which I would have had a clue how to do without the consulting skills that I'd built up to that point. So that was it for me. Really, really helpful.
That sounds like an amazing experience. That beats my travel to Birmingham and Southampton by a mile. Anyone else had any experience? I think the short answer to can you travel with consulting is absolutely yes. But has anyone else had any notable experiences that Tamsin, I think, sets the bar? I'm very much on the floor. Has anyone got anything in between?
I got to do some work in the Middle East, and I worked specifically in Saudi Arabia, and that was absolutely the best experience of my working career. Yeah, I think for an outsider to go into the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, it's absolutely fascinating. And I went at a time where there wasn't a lot of these reforms as well. And I know for a lot of people that's probably their worst nightmare, but I'm probably a bit of a Louis Theroux, and curious about how other societies exist. And yeah, definitely best working experience of my time. And that was doing some health work on actually reforming the mental health services in the kingdom. So it wasn't actually just interesting work. It was also really impactful work, when mental health is a really important element, or something I'm really quite interested in.
Travel is very different depending on the kind of project you're sort of on. Like those two where you actually feel like you're quite immersed in a culture is I wouldn't say completely rare. It's sort of not the typical travel. You can get a bit tired with business travel, is the truth of it. And it does very much depend on your client. So, it depends on what you want out of it, really. And you can find yourself actually not traveling if you join the wrong firm. So some big firms are structured so that they don't want consultants traveling all over the place. And so they use local consultants, in different markets. If you are very focused on particular types of industry, like maybe you get very focused on the energy sector, for example, and you might not travel as much as if you're in a consumer products sort of sector where you end up going around lots of different business units. It sort of depends. But you can set your kind of career up for doing a bit more travel, actually, if you really want it. My advocacy is find high margin businesses to work with that are often in like more exotic locations, because low margin businesses that sort of pump you around Europe, on a budget, not much fun. I was lucky to work with Electronic Arts, the computer games company, and they had a very generous travel policy. And so I would end up doing all sorts of fun things with them around the world. And yeah, so, think about it carefully.
Nick, I wanted to add something to what Tamsin was saying about the work that she did after Bain with Acumen. And I just wondered if there's anyone watching who's thinking, I really want to get into social impact stuff now. Do I have to really do consulting first? Maybe I want to get into like the charity sector or, the social impact sector. And I've had conversations with people at Emphasis about this, what would you have done looking back? And actually, I think, you have a good salary as a consultant and you pick up a lot of skills very quickly. And it can be a really great springboard to kind of all sorts of things, including that kind of work. So sometimes I was grappling with, God, I really would like to work in education and I'm at a kind of a big corporate working with commercial clients. Is this really what I want to do? And I think I just wanted to add that because long term, I think you can get there. And I think the consulting skill set is really helpful in order to do that. So yeah, maybe that's helpful for some people.
Harriet, I think a great point, particularly like you say, the key thing of the skills you gain. And I think almost building slightly to your point, slightly to Darren's, the other thing for anyone looking to travel is the skill set gives you the ability to do all of the amazing things, you mentioned, Tamsin mentioned, but also simply if you want to go and live abroad, you can take that skill set to other countries, go and work for similar. I've had guests on my show who have literally moved from a consulting firm in the UK to one in Singapore, America. There's lots of opportunities there. So we're fast approaching the end of our time together, and we've got time, I'd say, for two more questions. So one is just picking up on Darren, what you were saying about bravery. And I know all four of you touched on this in different themes. So I'll let you take this almost to the theme that was most powerful for yourself. And the question we've got is, how did you, in your junior career, when you were early in consulting, how did you build the necessary confidence to do the job, to be an advisor? What was it that helped you get the skills that you've talked about? And because of time, I'm going to ask for a 30-second from each of you. Darren, is it your question? Do you want to start? And then we'll go around the group.
Gosh, that's a hard question to be super quick on, and quite an emotional question for me as well, actually, that one, because it was quite, and I will try and keep this succinct, Nick, but it was quite a personal challenge for me. And I think that sort of comfort around, new people speaking in front of groups, that kind of thing, which is what I was referring to, took quite a lot of reprogramming, to be honest with you. I worked with a coach. I learned some really small things. Like one of the things avoiding preparation is not the way to get comfortable with then speaking in front of a group, and if you're anxious, it's what you always do because you don't want to think about it. So, you end up stressing yourself out more. Learning about the physiology of stress in those environments is really important, like that your body's doing the natural thing, sort of getting you geared up to perform, but it can feel like it's gearing you up to fail because it feels not very nice, when you've got some adrenaline, but just realizing that little things for me, I would get to a room early, and as people arrived, actually make a bit of a human connection with them, remember that they want me to succeed, actually, unless they're a psychopath, which there are a few in the world, right? But who cares about them, right? But the majority of people actually really want you to succeed, and that's really important. And asking questions and listening is actually, rather than always think, I've got to tell them all this information, actually, build connection with people, pull from them, those things, like there's lots of them. And by the way, genuinely, is anyone struggling with that? Because it's such a personal thing. I just reach out to me. I'd happily talk to you about it. But there's lots of practical things you can do in the early stages.
Amazing, Darren. You're quite right. We frankly could do a whole podcast on this. Maybe there'll be a round two with Explore, and we can all come back and dive into that. And yeah, some really good advice there. Harriet, same question. Any additions? Anything that you want to add to that?
Yeah. So I really like this thing from a guy called Stephen Covey. He wrote a book on trust, and he says trust is the confidence that you feel in someone. So I think it's about. I always worried about do people trust me? Can they trust that I'm good at stuff? Can I trust myself? And I think it's about knowing from a competence point of view, knowing what you own. So what's your kind of part of the problem that you're owning, and really understanding that. And if you need a cheat sheet when you go into a meeting where it's got all the stuff that you do know and you need to refer to it, have that on the table and refer to it. You don't need to know everything off the top of your head. I think Julianne was talking about, and Darren too, ask questions. I think it's really important. You own a part, but maybe you don't know all the answers. So, ask questions as well. And then Darren was also talking about, just being a person and showing your character. I think one thing I grappled with was not showing my full self at work because I'm not an A-type. I'm a bit scatty. I'm not a typical Bain consultant, to be quite honest. And so I found that quite tricky. And I think there's a little bit of sort of reprogramming, like Darren said, but I think there's also a point about authenticity as well. So just knowing what your natural style is. And, you may need to flex a bit depending on your work environment, but stay true to that because I think that's really grounding.
Some fantastic advice in there. And I think it's worth saying for our audience, so I think we've merged the last two questions together and some of this advice, it's bravery, it's how to succeed. I think there's so much in here in this last sort of 5-10 minutes. So coming on and continuing that theme, Julianne, same question, take it as bravery, take it as some of the points you read, take it as just simply the things you would have wanted to know back when you started in consulting. What advice would you give our audience?
So I think 2 words for me, preparation and inquisitiveness. Being prepared, you can't underestimate the importance of preparation. So I'm not ashamed to say I literally Googled every single person on this panel a few times before I spoke today to make sure that I was aware who I'm going to be sitting on the panel with. We have so many resources to stalk people online at the moment. So you have no excuses to not know somebody before you meet them. It's always important to do that. Being inquisitive is something that I've learned. It's just important in general in life. So I think the importance of that cannot be underestimated as a consultant. I'm going to pick up on the point that Harriet made at the end about bringing yourself to work. And I always debate this with my husband about the authenticity. To what extent can you be authentic at work? I think you can't be fully authentic at work personally, but there is an element of yourself that you should try to bring to work as much as possible. And for me in consulting, I had to really accept that I was an introvert. And that's probably a surprise for a lot of people that's watching this, but I do not find my energy in people. Very much at the end of the day, I need to hide and regain some strength. And I think in consulting, especially when you're on some of these long assignments where you're with your project Monday to Thursday and you feel there's an expectation that you have to go out for drinks every night in order to be seen and to progress, it's okay to say no and go to your hotel room and watch Family Guy like I used to like doing. Like, it's absolutely okay to bring that aspect of myself to work.
I love that, Julianne. I think that really resonates with me. I'm a total introvert as well. I've got a feeling we might be indexing high on that on this panel, but yeah.
No, some brilliant points. And Julianne, I think that actually for the person who asked about stress personally, and I've not a long point, but I know when I struggled in my early consulting career, it was actually maintaining 2 different personalities is extremely difficult. So bring as much of yourself to work as you can and you'll feel much more natural in it. And Tamsin, last but by no means least, do you want to share your advice for our panel to take away from today?
I guess related to all of that, for me, kind of culture trumps everything. So there's everything you can do to find out the people that you are working with and what they are like and how they treat each other and how they look after each other. I just think the more you can do around that, the better. I know it's going to be tricky this year in times of COVID, but as many of these kind of events as you can get on, I'm sure all consulting firms will be doing digital events to help you learn about them. Because, it's a cliche, but the best bit about Bain for me was the people. And not only because I made friends there for life, but also had some amazing bosses. I can embarrass Deri. He's not on the screen, so we can't see him blush, but he was one of my first bosses and was brilliant and believed in me and just assumed I could do everything that I knew secretly. I had no idea what I was doing, and that stuck with me. And so the more you can find people who are just going to be fun and compelling to work with, the better.
Amazing. Well, thank you all for your time. I've really enjoyed this, hosting it. I think there's been so much in there for our audience. So thank you very much. For those who are watching this at the moment, if you want to find out more about how you can get a career in consulting, how you can act on some of the advice that our panel have talked about, firms that you might be interested in. Obviously, you'll be seeing a lot of Deri, but hello@exploreconsulting.careers. Also, again, I'll make my personal invite very welcome to connect with me on LinkedIn. Go through Deri, I think, unless there's anyone else, but you can find us, like Julianne said, it's pretty easy to Google us. And if you want to find out more about other things in consulting, other careers, www.exploreconsulting.careers. So everyone, thank you. Harriet, Darren, Julianne, Tamsin, thank you so much for today. And we'll let you get back to your day and we'll move on to the next session.
Well done, Nick. Great job.
Thanks for having me. Bye.
I hope you enjoyed today's episode of Climbing Consulting. If you have any guest recommendations, comments, ideas, thoughts on how I can make this show better for you, just drop me an email. It's nick@createengage.co.uk, and I really look forward to hearing from you.